had the opportunity to meet Ted a couple of days ago by phone, and my first question when I saw his resume was to ask him, so Ted, how big are you? And then he started talking about Xapo and this company he had and how much capital they had, and he didn't realize I was actually asking him about his physical size. But anyway, I thought it was odd to have a linebacker and a bodybuilder on the same stage together. But I wrote a piece a couple of years ago called The Faustian Bargain, and it had to do with the risk of hyperinflation in Japan, and it got a lot of attention. Hans Wiedmann of the Bundesbank quoted me, and I was really surprised. And it really pointed to the fact that the history of fiat currencies is pretty bleak. As I tell people, the history of money is checkered. Kings have long been known for debasing their currencies by scraping the edges off of coins. That's why we have serrated edges on our coins today, and using it to pay for palaces and wars. And then, of course, ultimately a pound of sterling that used to be what the British pound was based on today is a little coin in your pocket that it doesn't have any precious metals at all. And it's interesting, Ted, your institution, Xapo, is built around, at this stage, Bitcoin, which has to do with the custody of Bitcoins. And so, I guess the place to start is I'm an investor. Let's imagine that I might actually want to use some of my client money and invest in Bitcoins. How does your firm help me?
Sure. So Xapo was found, and by the way, it's Xapo, not Zappos. You can imagine. I've had to explain that a few times. We basically provide secure storage for Bitcoin and possibly in the future more digital currencies. And then we also have an application that allows you to easily spend, receive, to use your Bitcoin day to day. So it's a combination of ease of use and then the equivalent of a safe deposit box or savings account for your Bitcoin.
So why do I care? I mean, right? I mean, first off, let's just start with something simple. Let's say I want to buy a Bitcoin, right? And as I understand, a Bitcoin today is worth roughly $450, right? Where do I go?
Well, you can buy it through us, which I would appreciate, but you don't have to. There's a lot of different ways to buy Bitcoin. There are Bitcoin ATMs. There are other exchanges, and you can buy via wire or ACH, and you can also go to a site like localbitcoins.com and buy Bitcoins face-to-face in person. But to answer your first question, why do I care? I believe sincerely that this is the best money that civilization has ever seen. For 5,000 years, we've held up gold as the standard for sound money. And Bitcoin is better than gold in virtually all 6 categories that matter: scarcity, portability, divisibility, verifiability, recognizability, and fungibility. That last one, gold, might be a little bit better because one piece of gold is the same as any other. Each Bitcoin has its own history, but otherwise Bitcoin is better than gold.
Well, the purposes of money, right, according to academics, is that it's a store of value. It's a medium of exchange, and it's a unit of account, right? So it seems to me at this stage of the game, what we're focusing on is storing the value, right? So I get my Bitcoins, I put it in my Bitcoin wallet. That sounds pretty good, right? I mean, I don't have to worry about it. It's on my computer, right? Well, why do I care about Xapo?
Yeah. Well, in the case of Xapo, what really matters is that if you have more than a little bit of Bitcoin, you're going to want to protect it, because if you have it on your computer or on your mobile device and it's attached to the internet, you can be hacked. Any device that's attached to any network can be hacked. And what we do when you store your Bitcoins with us in our what we call our vault, we take it offline. The Bitcoins are stored in cold servers, which means servers that have never been connected to any network and never will be. And in fact, these servers are kept underground, and we have them in ex-military bases in different places around the world, so it's extremely secure.
Okay, so essentially what you're telling me is if I put my Bitcoins in my wallet and I leave them on my computer, that I have the possibility of being virtually hacked or virtually pickpocketed. And so I can come to you and you can put my Bitcoins in your safe, and so my Bitcoins are safe, right?
That is correct.
Right.
Yeah.
But, we're talking about the Bitcoin being a store of value, and you mentioned gold in particular. The price of Bitcoins has been pretty volatile. Matter of fact, the value of the Bitcoin, I think, peaked out around, was it $1,900?
A little lower, but yeah.
Yeah, about 2 years ago, just about the same time that gold peaked out at $1,900. And gold today is worth $1,200, and Bitcoins are worth $450.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it does seem to have a lot of the same characteristics as gold, but, for us investment geeks, I mean, we would say it has a higher beta, but certainly more volatility. So, why do you think that this virtual currency is going to be better than gold?
One is network effects. So, first of all, it's like gold in the sense that it is the ultimate store of value. Gold is the one thing that if you had invested in hundreds, thousands of years ago, it would have held its value. You couldn't say that about virtually any other option. And that's true for the future as well, except when it comes to Bitcoin, it's a better option. One of the reasons Bitcoin is better is that right now, the volatility is very high, but the growth is also very high. There's about 60 to 100,000 new users on the Bitcoin network every day. That's accelerating. We think that once we hit about 1 billion users of Bitcoin, which should happen in 3 to 5 years, you'll see an inflection point where Bitcoin is essentially ubiquitous, not just as a store of value, but as a method of transaction. I think the best analogy is to email. Right now, we're in 1992, 1993, and a lot of people are looking at Bitcoin the same way they looked at email or the internet. So we make that analogy a lot. Bitcoin 2014 is the internet 1993. And at that time, it was a bit of a curiosity. You heard about it. Maybe you saw some people in the library working with it. You said, what are those nerds doing, sending messages to each other, And then we hit a point where through AOL or Hotmail or Yahoo, everyone had an email address, and suddenly, instantly, it became ubiquitous, not just important, but essential. It sort of took over the world. Bitcoin will do that as well.
I'm a single guy still, and I've dated a lot over the years, and candidly, I've met a lot of people that I think are users. And you used the phrase user, so, I mean, what's a user? And let me ask one more thing. Most of the users that I've met are looking for my wallet. So, are these users looking for your wallet? I mean, I'm lost. What's a Bitcoin user?
Yeah, that's an interesting, fair question. It really, the thing about Bitcoin, it's been adopted in different places, different geographies for different reasons. In the developed world, the fact is that we have different options to invest in that people in maybe the developing world don't have. And so we look at Bitcoin as a speculative investment only. So people who are buying Bitcoin, people who are users of Bitcoin in North America, for example, are doing so because they think the price is going to go up. But if you go to Argentina...
So these are people that are actually buying Bitcoins, users.
Okay. That is correct, yeah. And they're not really spending it on anything because we haven't hit that point where there's enough goods and services for sale day to day for them to do anything with it. But when you go to places like Argentina and other places where their local currency is not a reliable store of value, they're buying it not as a speculative investment, but to keep their earnings from being halved day to day. It's an extraordinary need in many places in the world. So users are users of Bitcoin for a lot of different reasons in different places.
So, okay, let's say I buy into this. Obviously, the big concern that people have with currencies in general, and Bitcoin is a virtual currency, right, is that somebody one day, like a central banker in Washington, decides to turn on the printing press and just to create lots of currency, right? Now we know that'll never happen at the Federal Reserve, but I mean, what stops somebody just from turning on the printing press and creating a lot of virtual Bitcoins?
Yeah, that's one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is that there can only be 21 million Bitcoin ever in existence. So right now there are about 13.5 million, and there's 25 new Bitcoin created every 10 minutes or so. In 3 years, it'll be 12.5 Bitcoin created every 10 minutes, and it goes down every 4 years from there until we hit 21 million. That's built into the Bitcoin protocol. So scarcity is built into what Bitcoin is.
Well, I mean, wait a minute. Who created these Bitcoins?
Yeah. I wish I knew. A lot of people have tried to find out. I think a Newsweek reporter, a Time reporter, thought they had found out, and the press badgered a poor old guy in LA named Satoshi Nakamoto, because the guy who wrote the white paper that was the foundation of the Bitcoin protocol and of Bitcoin is a guy named Satoshi Nakamoto. It may be a person, it may be a group of people, it may be a government, we don't know. I recommend that if you take the time to read it once or twice, do it if you can take the time. Like a lot of extraordinarily brilliant things that humans have come up with, it's rather simple and very readable, like the U.S. Constitution. You know, it's I think was said earlier in a panel. I forget who it was who said that this is a technology that comes along once every 10 years. I totally agree. This is probably once in a generation, once every 2 generations technology, and you can read it in 8 pages.
So these Bitcoins, as I understand, are mined, right?
Yeah.
And they're mined virtually. Yeah. So who are the Bitcoin miners?
Yeah. So Bitcoin is a digital ledger maintained on a peer-to-peer network. So millions of different computers around the world have copies of this ledger. And on that ledger is the history of every Bitcoin, every transaction that's ever happened in Bitcoin. And we could go there now, we could get online and publicly see any transaction that's ever happened in Bitcoin. That's one of the things, the transparency, that makes it a trustable system. But the people who enter these transactions onto the Bitcoin ledger are called miners. They do the work of essentially verifying that a given Bitcoin transaction is legitimate. They put all these transactions into what's called into a block of transactions, and they put it on a chain of blocks. So every 10 minutes or so, a new block of transactions is entered onto the blockchain, and the blockchain goes all the way back to the first Bitcoin, the Genesis block. The miners, in exchange for doing this, are able to write a transaction into the block in which they receive a reward, in this case 25 Bitcoin. So that's how new Bitcoins enter circulation.
Okay, so we know that the supply of Bitcoins is strictly controlled and relatively predictable. We know there are 21 million Bitcoins that can come into existence by 2140, and in theory, that's the end of it all. So with 21 million Bitcoins at $450, that's $9.5 billion worth of Bitcoins that can come into existence. Seems relatively insignificant in a $65 trillion global economy.
Yeah.
So, why is Bitcoin going to become the thing that is going to feed global finance?
Yeah. First of all, just to make one point about Bitcoin and 21 million. Each Bitcoin is divisible by 8 decimal points. And in fact, so the number of potential bits, as we call them, which are 6 decimal points to the right of a Bitcoin, is plenty to support the global economy if you do the math on that. And I think we'll pretty soon we're going to be quoting in bits rather than Bitcoin. So essentially pennies rather than dollars. But to answer your question, I think that the main point and the reason that Bitcoin is going to take over the world, or at least be one of the currencies, one of the global currencies, is it's much easier and simpler than what exists right now. And it's the difference between, again, prior to 1993, we were writing letters and we were calling people on our phones, and I myself remember saying, what the heck would I need an electronic message for? Until you experience the ease of sending someone anytime, anywhere in the world, basically for free and instantly, money for any reason, it's hard to understand why Bitcoin is going to succeed. But once you do that and you start using it, you will.
Okay, so we'll consider the fact that the Federal Reserve has created about $5 trillion or $4 trillion worth of what's called high-powered money. That is the money that's actually come off the printing press of the Federal Reserve. Today, we've got $9.5 billion potential of what I'll call base Bitcoins in circulation, or potentially in circulation. So then I guess you could argue that if you believed all of this, that it might be reasonable that Bitcoin somewhere in the future could be worth 500 times what we're saying today, to bring it up to the comparability of the US reserves. But one thing about US reserves is those are the foundation of the banking system. And people can actually make loans with these things and these dollars that are out there. And we haven't gotten to the point where Bitcoins can be made as loans. And so, what's often referred to, as a marginal reserve system doesn't exist. And one of the big reasons that this hasn't happened is that, nobody's really transacting in Bitcoins, unless you buy a Tesla. But once you own a few of those, you really don't have much more need for them. So, this is a pretty big hurdle to get Bitcoins to be a medium of exchange.
That's right, and I never did answer your question as to why the price might go up from its current price, and it basically comes down to supply and demand. My belief is that as the number of users of Bitcoin spreads, and as we hit that inflection point, which will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 million users to 1 billion users, it will become a ubiquitous method of transacting, and at that point, the price will go up exponentially. I think another way to measure the price, Scott, is to look at it, try and predict Bitcoin as a percentage of M2 money supply. If you try and do that and you sort of anticipate the growth of Bitcoin and compare it and see how it might leak into M2, you can come up with some pretty interesting valuations there as well. Regarding the Federal Reserve and other governments and what they're going to do about it and how Bitcoin compares with that, I don't really know, and I'm sure governments are nervous about it because it is a competitor and it may become a check on certain behaviors in certain governments. It's not going to replace the US dollar or any other relatively healthy currency. It might move alongside of it in some way. But I do know this about Bitcoin, that basically every financial service that an individual or business could want can be performed with Bitcoin. I've loaned out Bitcoins on a peer-to-peer lending site online. I continue to do so. Eventually, pretty much every financial service that a bank offers will be offered through Bitcoin as well. And by the way, it will be offered to people, currently about 5 billion people, who don't have access to banking services that you and I take for granted. So imagine if you're in Africa or another place and you're trying to run a small business or maintain the family and you can't have access to a bank account. Well, now you can through a mobile phone using Bitcoin.
Well, we have Ashish Takar and Tanya Cole here. I mean, they don't have to imagine being in Africa, so I'll be curious to hear afterwards what you think of this. And I've noticed that Barry Sternlight has not left the room yet to buy Bitcoin, so we still haven't convinced people. But one thing is, okay, let's say that we're into this, we believe it. What stops people from just counterfeiting these things?
Yeah, the Bitcoin protocol, the technology behind Bitcoin has been tested by everybody from Google to the NSA to different governments, and they haven't broken it. And the best hackers in the world have tried everything they could to violate the Bitcoin core protocol technologies. They haven't done it. And I think the reason that it can't be done is basically that the transparency of the system and the history of every Bitcoin being visible to anybody, the system of simple verification by miners prohibits the fraudulence of trying to hijack the blockchain and to create counterfeit Bitcoins.
We could go on all day. We don't have all day. But one thing I'd like to end with, I don't know if you know this, I'm on the Market Advisory Committee for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and I meet with them once a quarter. And I had an opportunity one day to tell a story to some of the presidents of the Federal Reserve. And I reached into my pocket and I pulled out these little bits of green paper. And I said, I can imagine that one day I'm going to be able to sit down with my grandchildren in 20 or 30 years and say to them, we used to carry these things around and we would hand them to people and they would give us things of value in exchange for them. And I can just imagine my grandson looking at me incredulously and saying, "Oh, grandfather, do you really think I'm that stupid? Everybody knows paper money isn't worth anything." Congratulations on your project.
Thanks.